Joe Pittman, Senate Majority Leader, what has to be worked out before Pennsylvania's budget is finalized?
Well, there are a lot of details that need to be worked out to make a budget a reality in Pennsylvania. And really, the big issue is making sure that we understand what the priorities are that are most helpful to the people of Pennsylvania. And we have a lot of conversation about how much money we have in fund balance and reserve and rainy day fund. And yes, it is true, we are in a very good fiscal position. Our objective and concern is making sure we keep it that way in the long term. Obviously, it's hard to predict the future. And while we're planning a budget for 12 months, we think that it is very important to try to keep a multi-year look ahead to make sure that we don't get ourselves in a situation where we're having funding expectations that we can't manage and not expose the taxpayer to any more harm than they already experienced when paying their taxes.
Senator, you said our overall fiscal condition is good. Is it good enough to justify the governor's proposal as far as this final spend number is concerned for the state budget?
Well, we do think the governor's proposal had too much spending in it generally. We do realize that there are a lot of areas where inflationary pressures are causing us to have to react as well. And what I mean by that is there are some human services areas, particularly nursing homes, particularly the providers who serve the intellectual disability community, who are experiencing extraordinary inflationary pressures. They can't keep pace with wages to keep and retain and recruit the employees needed to provide those critical services. And so that is part of the challenge that we have, is managing inflation impacts even at the state government level.
So let's talk about education funding, and certainly that's a significant part of the budget. And the governor is proposing about $1 billion increase for school funding. And often the main concern, however, is how to distribute that money.
That's the most critical concern. And one of the things that I've expressed, and I think one of the biggest challenges that we have to cross over these next several days, is reconciling how, among 500 school districts that are all unique, that all have a different definition of what's fair, how do we drive those dollars out as efficiently and effectively as possible to make sure that the needs are being met in all of those districts, and to ensure that if the state is going to continue to support school districts, there needs to be an expectation that the local taxpayer is going to be considered in their future decision making as well.
What is the governor's timetable for delivering this increase for basic education?
Well, there's a lot of discussion about the need to increase basic education based on the Commonwealth Court ruling that came forward a year ago. And yes, it did indicate that we need to make additional subsidies available to school districts and to public education. I think it's also important at the end of the day that that ruling was very clear that it's up to the General Assembly and the governor to figure out how to best fund public education in this Commonwealth, and not just public education, but ensuring that parents and families and students across this Commonwealth have access to educational opportunities. And that's the real key point.
Now, I understand that the governor does want to stretch spending for education spending over a span of 7 years, and that is causing some concern among Republicans. Can you tell us?
Well, the numbers that have been put out there about putting more money into public education in a certain time period are very much a concern, because, again, those expectations have to be managed because those dollars are recurring expenditures. When we talk about our fund balance, those are one-time dollars. When we talk about increasing spending on whether it's public education or any area, invariably those are recurring obligations.
Is there anything in the governor's proposal that can reduce our dependence on property taxes to fund basic education?
Well, we've worked very hard. For example, we expanded the property tax rent rebate program, which I think is a very important program. It helps seniors to have some relief on either their rent or their property taxes. We continue to support the what's called homestead exclusion, which allows for a property reduction on an individual's primary residence. But I do think that there needs to be more conversation about the reality that as the state taxpayer continues to put more dollars into education, that there should be some commensurate effort to support local taxpayers and make sure that that burden isn't made any greater than it absolutely needs to be. Now, of course, when it comes to local property taxes, keep in mind the state legislature does not vote to increase property taxes. That is a function of your locally elected school board. That's a function of your county commissioners and your municipal government. We do not levy a property tax.
Let's talk about school vouchers, funding for private and religious schools. And as you recall, about a year ago, that was hotly debated, and then that faded away. And now, is that discussion going to recur in the coming days?
Well, it's certainly something that we continue to believe that is fundamental, the need to empower parents. And whether that empowerment occurs through a voucher-like program such as the PASS initiative that we worked in a bipartisan fashion with the governor on last year, or through the Education Improvement Tax Credit Program, which has helped unlock educational opportunities for thousands of students in this Commonwealth. Those are key priorities of our Senate Republican caucus. The Education Improvement Tax Credit is a proven program. It's a popular program. And I think at a minimum, we need to further increase the opportunity for individuals to access that. But I will say this, whenever it comes to the PASS initiative that we worked with the governor on very closely and carefully last year, it's going to take the governor to be much more committed to getting it across the finish line than he has been over the last year, quite frankly. The reality is the House Democrat majority and the governor are of the same political party. They clearly have a bitter disagreement over what it means to empower parents, and they really, frankly, need to reconcile that disagreement if we're going to move forward.
There's been debate about possibly reducing funding for cyber charter schools. What about the position of your caucus?
Well, we think that cyber charter schools have a place in the education spectrum. We believe that it's part of giving parents an opportunity to make a decision about what is best for their students. Having said that, we also recognize that there are some issues with how cyber charter schools are funded. I think what the House has passed on that is draconian. I think, frankly, it's an effort to put cybers completely out of business. We do not want cybers to be unavailable to people of Pennsylvania, to their children, but we do think there are areas, particularly in the world of special education, that the way that public school districts are charged for tuition in special education services for students and cybers is problematic. And I think that's an area that we certainly are open to reforming to try to help school districts save taxpayer dollars on that end of the equation. And there are also some standards that we think need to be set. I mean, truancy is a huge issue generally in education. Truancy and accountability on that front in cyber education, I think, also needs to be considered.
Let's talk about the cost of higher education, and certainly everybody wants to reduce that. And I understand there's talk about reducing costs and maybe grants for students. What's happening right now that could be discussed in the coming days?
That's an area where the governor has worked very hard, I think, to present the problem of higher education in this Commonwealth. The solutions that he proposed were areas that we had some pretty strong disagreement with. However, we're reconciling those differences. I have to give Senator Martin, Senator Argel, Senator Ament some great credit for developing our caucus's initiative known as Grow PA. We've sent that initiative to the House. It's essentially designed to attract young people into this Commonwealth, to utilize our higher educational opportunities, to incentivize them to look at career fields where we are very much lacking in labor force. And I think that that is an area where we're going to be able to have some significant positive achievements in the days ahead.
The Senate passed a bill that reduces the personal income tax. Can you tell us the details?
Well, we simply believe that if the argument of having too much money in the bank account and we need to spend it, that we need to at least think about the fact that it's the taxpayers who put those dollars in that account to begin with. And so we really do believe that reducing the personal income tax is critical to unlocking the promise for Pennsylvanians to have economic growth and economic opportunity. Now, we certainly realize that particularly our friends on the other side of the building, the House Democrat majority, has no interest in reducing the personal income tax. We understand that. I certainly am not naive to think that we can get that across the finish line. However, I do think that we have to do something dynamic in the world of taxation to try to promote economic growth and development in this Commonwealth. Our fastest growing age demographic in this Commonwealth is the 85 plus community. We have to do something to start bringing new investment into this Commonwealth.
Ever since Josh Shapiro took office, he's talked about changing the permitting process. First of all, what's the problem there? And then second, where does that discussion stand today?
Well, the permitting process in this Commonwealth, I don't think is any secret to anybody who's tried to navigate the bureaucracy that it is not consistent, it is not efficient, and it doesn't help unlock development in this Commonwealth because, frankly, time is money, particularly in these inflationary times. And so we have been very insistent, and Senator Kristen Phillips Hill has been a leader on this issue, where we have brought business groups, we have brought labor groups together who recognize there's a symbiotic relationship whenever it comes to development in this Commonwealth. Investment leads to jobs, and not just any kind of a job, but a living wage, family sustaining job. And so permitting reform in our mind has to be a top priority as we conclude this budget, particularly if we want to follow suit with investments in economic development. Setting aside dollars to invest in economic development does no good if you can't get the shovel in the ground. And oftentimes the permitting process is what stands in the way of that happening.
Now, budget negotiations take place behind closed doors, but can you give us any insight as to how that process works?
It's a difficult process because, quite frankly, this is a divided government. The majority that I represent here in the Senate has a widely different view of the vision of Pennsylvania than our friends in the House Democrat majority have on the other side of the building. And that's okay. And it's our job to figure out how to reconcile those differences, to work with the governor, to recognize and appreciate that divided government can be functional government. We do not have to have a dysfunctional government. We have to understand where we agree, where we disagree, reconcile those differences, set aside the disagreements, and try to do the best for all the people of Pennsylvania.
The deadline for the budget is Sunday. How does your schedule look like for the next few days?
I don't think we'll have our work completed on June 30th, but as we know, as the years have gone by, that if the work is not completed on June 30th, there is very little functional difference if we go several days past that deadline. I'm confident that within a week or so of June 30th, that we should have everything completed that we need to complete to put the best product in place for the people of the Commonwealth.
Joe Pittman, Senate Majority Leader, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Larry. Appreciate it.